Welcome to the next video in the Suggestion app course. This is a complete course where we'll build a .NET 6 Blazor server application with MongoDB from the ground up. There are three things you need to know before we get started. First, this is part of a series, and this isn't the first video in the series. If you're just starting out, you should check out the playlist that's linked in the description to start from the first video in the series. Second, this course is actually a paid course. MongoDB sponsored it so you can put the videos on YouTube for free. Check out the link in the description to sign up for MongoDB Atlas for free to thank them if you haven't already. Third, you can also buy this course on imtimcorey.com. The link is in the description. Buying this course will get you all the lessons right away, the source code for each lesson, a certificate of completion, offline access, and more. It also helps sponsor more free content. The video will be the same as it is on YouTube, so feel free to watch the free version if you want to. Okay, let's jump into today's video. Note there may be more than one lesson in this video, since some lessons are short.
Now let's take on the profile page. But in order to do this, we're going to have to make some additions to the suggestion data. So the profile page is going to be the page where if you're logged in, you can see all of the suggestions that you have made, not just the ones that have been approved. So it'll be approved suggestions, archived suggestions, pending suggestions, and rejected suggestions. We have 4 different lists on the page, but we don't have a way yet of pulling all that data. So we need to go to suggestion data, and we need a way to pull just the data that is for you, which is more than what we have in the get all suggestions. Notice the get all suggestions does not bring in archived suggestions. So we need to figure out a way to get even those suggestions, and that is a separate method. So let's put it right here. We'll say public async task list of suggestion model. And we'll call this GetUsersSuggestions and string user ID to pass in the identifier of who we're looking up. So we're going to say first, let's grab the memory cache because we're going to cache this for the user. And the only reason we'll cache it for the user is because of the fact that if you come back to the page multiple times, we don't want to have an issue of you having to reload your information every single time, but we won't keep it for long. We'll probably keep it for a minute. Var output equals cache dot get list suggestion model, passing in the user ID. So it's the key name for our cache is going to be the user ID. That way it's unique to the user. And that's important here because the cache is used across users. So you could potentially, small chance, but you could potentially have one user see another user's cache unless if you allowed them to say what the cache key was. We never do. We specify with information we control. Therefore, there is no cross-contamination. There is no way for one user to see another user's data. But just note that you never want to give the user access to read from the cache by specifying their own cache key. Otherwise, there is an outside possibility. If they had that long string, they could find that user's information. All right, if output is null, then we're going to say var results equals await suggestions dot find async, where the suggestion dot author dot ID equals user ID. So it's going to do a lookup in the suggestion collection, and it's going to base it upon the author ID. Now, since we're doing this, we may have a performance improvement if we were to index this ID. So remember, this is a sub-object underneath the suggestion. If we index this ID, it might make it more performant when looking up users' data. We're going to look through every single record for a matching ID. So just note that. Don't do it yet. Wait until you actually have data in use before you go and start making indexes. Otherwise, you may find that you're making indexes that make your data slower, not faster. So indexes are always a balancing act. Output equals results to list. And then don't forget to cache this. User ID, output time span from minutes 1. And then return output. So this will give us our list of suggestions for the user. It does not limit them by archive status or rejected status or any other status. So it gets every suggestion the author has made regardless of their status. So now we can start using this almost, because this is in our Mongo suggestion data, but it's not in iSuggestion data. It's not in our interface. Therefore, since we're using the interface everywhere, we don't have access to this yet. So if we select the method name, we hit Control dot for the quick actions refactoring, we have the pull GetUsersSuggestions up to iSuggestion data. What they'll do is it will add an entry into our interface for this method. Done. And now we have 1 reference instead of 0, and we can start using this. So back on pages, we can create the profile page. And we'll get rid of our H3 because that isn't necessary, but we can say page/profile. That's the way to get to it. And then this will be a page that you have to be authorized in order to see, but for right now, we don't have the authorization in place. Not a problem. We can just basically fake it. Let's inject iSuggestion data and say suggestion data. And then let's also inject user data. And let's also inject navigation manager. Okay, those 3 things will set us up for success. And now what we do is come down to our code and we'll start setting things up. So private user model. And this is the logged in user, which we're going to spoof for now. And then we need to have a bunch of lists. The way we're going to do this is we're going to have the main list, which is all of your suggestions. But then I want to have 4 separate lists for the 4 different types. So we have a approved type, an archive type, a pending type, and a rejected type. So we're going to create a separate list for each of these. Instead of trying to do a filter for each list, we're just going to do 4 separate sublists. So let's start with private list of suggestion model, and we'll call this submissions. So these are all the submissions you've made. We could call them suggestions, but these are all things you've submitted. Now let's copy this and we're going to paste it 4 more times. And these will be approved. And then these will be archived. These will be pending. And these will be rejected. I'm going to show you why we're going to do multiple sublists instead of having just a filter applied for the submissions list. So protected, override, OnInitializedAsync. I'll make this an async method. We'll get rid of the base return. And we're going to say we grab the user object. Now, normally we do, and here let's put our to-do here. In fact, let's go over to our create page and grab the exact same to-do, because we're going to do the exact same thing here of we'll look it up by ourselves manually, but then eventually we'll just replace this string with whatever the user's logged in identifier is. So that gives us what we need. And then we can say var results equals await suggestion data dot get users suggestions. That's the new one we just created. We can say logged in user.id. That gives us the user's suggestions, just their suggestions. And we need to do make sure we do a check here to be sure they're logged in. So if logged in user is not null and results is not null, then submissions equals results dot order by descending s arrow s dot date created to list. So this just gives us a list we can work with over and over again. It's kind of like caching the data in memory, but this is the overall list. And we'll just use this for if we have to recreate something or redo something. We probably won't use it much at all, but it's a good starting point to have. Now approved equals submissions where s dot approved for release and s dot archived equals false and s dot rejected equals false. So yeah, we're going to scroll here on this, but it is what it is. Let's unpin this, and we'll say to list. So there's our first comparison, our first filter, where we've taken the submissions list and you've filtered it down to, hey, it has to be approved, it can't be archived, and it can't be rejected. So we've already ordered the submissions descending by date, so therefore it brings that over with this list as well. Next up is archived equals submissions dot where s dot archived and s dot rejected equals false. That's just a double check. So in theory, when we archive something, we're archiving something that hasn't been rejected. Archive will be used for if it's been on the site for a while and we're just kind of clearing the list off. We haven't rejected it. We just, the audience didn't really resonate with it or something like that. Or maybe it's been completed and it's been completed for a while. We don't need to keep it on forever. So therefore we archive it. Those are all approved suggestions. Therefore, we shouldn't have any that are rejected, but just be doubly sure, we'll add this criteria as well. Next up is pending equals submissions dot where s dot approved for release equals false and s dot rejected equals false to list. So this list is those that have not yet been approved for release, but they also haven't been rejected. Remember that we're not going to approve things for release if we find they violate our terms in some way. So what we'll do instead is we will reject them, which means we will never say approve for release. So if we want the pending ones, we don't want the rejected ones. We don't want the ones that are approved yet for release either. That gives us our correct criteria. And finally, the rejected equals submissions.where ss.rejected.toList. So pretty clear here. If you have had your suggestion marked as rejected, that goes in the rejected category. Okay, so those are our 5 lists. We have our base list, and then we have the 4 filtered lists. Now, we could have taken this criteria right here and used this in a for loop, or for each loop, but I found it was just too cumbersome, so I want to create a separate list for it. It is slightly more memory intensive to do that, but it's only very, very slightly, because the actual contents are not being duplicated. They're just, again, references. So it's only with the list itself, and that's a pretty small thing. So I'm not worried about performance here. So that's the OnInitializedAsync. That gives us all of our data. The only other thing we have to add is our private void close page, which we've done before, which is navmanager.navigate to, like so. And that will close out the page. So that's all of our code for this page. Now let's talk about the HTML for this page. Let's start with our H1, and that will say my profile. And then we're going to have a div. This will be a row. And then inside here will be our close button. So button, and then we'll have a @onClick equal to close page. And then we will close the button out. Again, we won't put any text in here because this button will have the X icon in it. Now let's start with the layout for our content. This layout is going to be pretty simple. We're not going to go crazy layout design kind of thing. We're just going to have four lists. That's all it's going to be. So let's start with the top section though, which will be a link to modify or to modify your login. And we're going to just put the link in place, but not actually have it go anywhere yet. So let's create a div. And then in here, we'll have an H2 that says my account. Since this is your profile page, we should have a link to your account to make any modifications. We'll have a paragraph, and we'll have an anchor tag inside. For now, the href will just be on the page itself, and we'll say, edit my login. Okay, or edit my account, edit my profile. There we go, better. Edit my profile. So that's going to be the edit section for my account. Now let's start adding these lists to the page. Now what I'm going to do is I add one list, and then we're going to put it inside the if statement, and we're going to duplicate it 4 times because we have 4 different lists. So this will be inside an if statement, and then we'll have a div, which inside a div will have an H2 that says approved suggestions. And then we'll have a paragraph tag, and I'll copy and paste this because it's a little bit longer, but this is a small sentence about what these are. And then we'll have a for each. Again, I'll paste that in once we're done writing the code for it. We're gonna have a horizontal rule first. That's just put the line across the page. And then we'll have a div that has s dots. We have to have this inside the for each because we don't have the variable. Let's cut this out and hope that the divs work inside here. So for each var s in approved. So in here, we're going to have our curly braces, and then we'll paste this in. And there we go. The S should work now, .suggestion. Perfect. And then let's have a paragraph. And inside here, we'll have our s.date created. And we'll do a toString. And the format we used before was month, day, 4 year. Or 4-digit year. Whoops, no semicolon needed. So let's go to the next one. And that is another paragraph. And we're going to have total votes. s.uservotes.count. And then we'll have another paragraph and say s.category.category name. So we're basically listing all the stuff inside of the suggestion. And we'll have another paragraph, and this one will have s.description. And we'll also have a section down here inside an if statement that, let's just do it, if s.suggestion status is not null. So if you have if it's been marked with a status, then div, and we'll have at s.suggestion status dot status name. And I'm not, that's why it's yelling, I think. I don't know why it's doing what it's doing. This editor, every once in a while, goes a little glitchy, and this is one of the places. Paragraph, and this is where we have the owner notes. And the same thing here, we're going to do the markup string and s.owner notes. So this right here will give us a section that will only display if you have a suggestion status, but if you do, we'll get the status name and what the owner, that's us, that's the admins, what they said about this suggestion status. So that's the profile for one entry. But let's cut this out for a minute. So Control X. And now we're going to wrap this in if. If approved is not null and approved dot count is greater than 0. So the reason we're doing this is because we don't want an approved section if you've never had a suggestion approved. So the approved list can't be null and it can't be empty. So if it's not empty, then and actually we can shorten this. There we go. If the approved is not null and the count is greater than 0, then put that list in place. All right, and I'm going to actually shift tab to move that in. It's going to be the same level as my curly braces, which normally I don't do, but, well, let's not. Let's tab it in one. So that's the approved section, but then we need a few more. So let's just copy the entire if and paste it in. And you may say, well, Tim, why is this so much repetition? Well, because we're doing 4 different lists. We could probably create some kind of complicated system to loop through these things, but I don't think that's really ideal. Because we could say, create a list of lists, and then for every list, loop through, but we still have to change from approved to archived. And for each S in archived, and we need to change this to archived, and we need to change the text as well. Let me go ahead and grab the a copy of that and paste it in. So these kind of changes, you would make a complicated list of lists. Therefore, we're just going to have 4 copies. So if you want to come up with a complicated or maybe an elegant solution to solve this, that'd be great. But I think that this works just fine. So pending, don't forget to change it here too, and change the text. And I will copy the text for pending. All right, so there's our pending section. The actual content is the same every time. So we can, keep the code the exact same. In theory, not everything has the opportunity to have a suggestion status. So for instance, the rejected, which we're doing now, this wouldn't have a suggestion status ever, in theory. But that's okay because the fact that it's just not going to show. So I'm okay with having a section there that's not going to show ever because the fact that it keeps our code uniform. And yes, we're violating dry, we're repeating ourselves, but we kind of have to do that, and that's okay. So that just means we have to remember we have 4 copies of anything we want to change. If we want to make a change somewhere, we have to change it 4 times, which we're going to do. So we're going to see how to go about doing that and doing so effectively and efficiently. But yeah, there's our 4 sections. Let's load this up and run it. So once this launches, we will see that the site we have to navigate to it manually, but we can go to Profile, and it says Unhandled Exception. Excellent. Don't just reload these things. It says down here at the very bottom, Unhandled Exception has occurred. See the browser dev tools for details. Hit F12, and we'll find out why. Unable to cast type System.string to list. Okay, so we have a problem of a cast, and that is on, looks like line 37 of a suggestion data. So that's where our issue is. We can track that down. Cool, it's always good to have an error to give us something to do. So let's go to it. Let's come over here to our, we can close this out. We can go to our data access, suggestion data. Line 37 is right here. Let's find out why we can't get anything from our cache. So we're going to come over here and reload the page. And we have a user ID, and the user ID is a string. So let's see why it won't get the cache. No, I don't know why. So it says null. Let's skip over this. We'll set the cache. We'll return output. So that worked. This time we're going to pass in that string. And it looks like it's working. The second time it doesn't seem to work. Interesting. So let's bring the dev tools back up. And it says invalid cast exception. Unable to cast object system.string to type generic list of model. Okay, so let's go back to our code again. And maybe you saw it. Maybe, if you didn't see it, then I will show you what the issue is. So the first time it worked just fine, and it cached the information, but it came through a second time, which is what happens when you have the code server rendered. So the first time, cached the information, which is right here, The second time we tried to get the information and cast it to type list of suggestion model. The problem is when I did a set here, I passed in the key and the value is the same as the key. That's not right. That's the value. So I was caching the wrong thing. So let's try this again. Let's hopefully cache the correct thing this time. So we can go to /profile, and there we go. There's my profile, which of course looks a lot like the main page because of the fact that I have approved all the suggestions for this person. So you only have one list, it's the approved suggestions. There are no other lists. But we could come over here and make some changes. So let's change, this is a test, to, we can change the rejected to true. And we can change the approved for release to false. So this first one's been rejected. And then also let's go to our third suggestion and set this to archived. We can still say approved for release, but it's now been archived. And then let's go over here to our page and we can hit refresh and it's been cached. So let's close out the page and start over. That'll just make sure that our page loads the fresh data instead of the cached data. Notice that, our list here is shorter. We now have 4 suggestions instead of 6. So let's go to our profile. And we have approved suggestions, the 5th, 4th, 2nd, and 1st. We have archive suggestions, that's the 3rd. And we have rejected suggestions, that's the test. So we now have a few different options here for what we have in our list. And that's what a profile page is going to look like. We even have our edit my profile link if we wanted to edit our profile, which does nothing right now. Our button will take us back to the main page. So that's the profile page. It's going to get more robust once we actually have the ability to log into our system. We'll get there soon, but that's all we need to do to get that profile up and running.